Then we'll put one off on its own. I'm sticking right around the center. We know the light is up on the top, so if you're going to break up the line like this, do it on the top side. Drawing is really just a big conspiracy. We're just trying to find illusions and tricks to make people believe they're seeing something they are not. All right, it looks kind of bubbly. It's kind of funny, but let's keep going here. Same as we did with the bumps over here on the basketball. As we go below that center, the core shadow, the Terminator, we need more value. Our easiest way to do that is just more line weight, more lines in general. So if I just do the exact same pattern down here with more line weight, more lines, it would be darker. But we also want to kind of lose some of that information. So what I'm going to do is kind of only accent the bottom still and start to combine our shapes together wherever I can. So maybe this time I'll do a small, medium, small. I'll put a big one coming off the bottom. And my goal here is when I put in hatching to kind of absorb all that together. Up here, we're going to do the opposite. We're only really going to see a tiny bit of shadow on the underside of these things. So it'll be like that. Little tiny seams here and there. Because all this is getting bleached out by the light. Just like this one up here of our basketball. You can still have some larger forms for sure. All right. Now, I'm going to put in my hatching on the base form, not the little bumps, but on the base form itself. And notice on the underside here, below the Terminator, I'm bleeding some of my marks into those bumps. Trying to blend them in to that same texture. I'm leaving just a little bit of a gap up at the top to say that there's light hitting the top of those bumps. But in general, we're just trying to push it all into one neat value. So it's not just about what you draw, it's also about what you don't draw. Restraint is a very hard thing to do in drawing. It's one of my biggest weaknesses, I think, is restraint. I want to draw everything. So you have to be very, very intentional and be careful about where you put in lines. It's easy just to be like, okay, I'm going to render the bottom of every single dot. But notice, even as I move up here, I'm squashing the hatch marks inside of these bubbles. I'm only putting them down at the bottom because now these are facing the light more and they're going to be more lit up on top. And we haven't even put in like all of our shapes and stuff to define this yet. We're just doing a preliminary hatch here. That already looks very, very textural just with that. We're like pretty much doing it. We haven't put in all the details yet. We're just thinking big. Now, on these ones just kind of in the middle, I'm going to put in that little snake eye. So let's do the really strong gap. If this is actually a cut, what I'm imagining is, if it's like a seam in here, if we could see into that, there might be some light hitting this ledge, and then all this would be in shadow. This is actually how eyelids work. And then you'd get like a little bit of shadow as this tucks down. But that creates a really nice contrast. Dark, light, gray. Actually, light, dark, gray. Or light, dark, light, gray, light. We're getting essentially like a, if I drew this in 3D, if the light is coming down this way, it's not going to be able to hit the underside of this, but it is going to be able to hit the top of this ledge, and then it's not going to be able to hit the underside of that. So you get a natural sandwich happening whenever you have a scalloped shape like that. So if each one of these divots is kind of acting like that, we could do a very dark line up on top, very heavy line, and then either ignore that lower line or make it very, very light. I'm using a Sharpie, so it might be easier for me to ignore it. We're just making considerations. That's all it is. Right, and then I'm going to kind of put in that like outer shape that's on these, the lighter value on the individual orbs here. And once again, I gotta be very careful about where I put my information. Every single time I put in a mark, it's lowering the overall value of each shape. Kind of have to think in averages here. Not a whole lot I can do on this one. That might be too fine of a detail for me to actually include. I'll just leave it out on most of them. Also, I'm, again, using a big heavy pen, which is a good thing. Like, it kind of forces you to think broadly and think big picture when you use kind of a blunt object like this. Yeah, there's a couple like little like seams and rips that I'm seeing, like even on the base, that are not connected to the orbs necessarily. I might just put in a couple of those here and there. That's good. Don't overdo it. And then let's think about some of that ambient occlusion and cast shadow. The light's coming from above. It's going to be a strong dark area underneath each one of these. I'm just pulling. This is my orby shape here. I'm just pulling the line weight down to create that cast shadow underneath each one of these. Sometimes you can describe a texture with just that. It's enough. Like, even that looks pretty textural. Feels like 3D. It's the sandwich. Again, here we have very strong contrast. Light, dark, light. Further down you go, the longer that cast shadow needs to be. So you're going to take that and go farther, creating more darkness overall. Really stretch it out at the bottom here. Up on top, there's barely any. The line weight I'm already working with is probably enough. Yeah, I'm just throwing a couple extra marks here to kind of blend up into the light. That looks pretty good to me already. It's maybe a little bit heavy-handed. I might need a like thinner pen, but this looks pretty good. It's also very, very. This is what I mean by heavy-handed. Like, the value of the stem and the photo we're using is very, very light. It's like a light green. It's got bright white little seams and the little eyeballs. It's not super dark, so you could use maybe a lighter pen and get a little bit farther. Maybe I'll do that. But for just a quick read of this texture and what's going on, I think that's pretty effective. I'm not worried about like highlight or anything here. I'm just keeping it kind of like to value. Any questions about that? Considerations I was making? Okay.
I guess I'm curious with the darkest point of the texture, how you're kind of deciding to still have highlights in those sections.
Down here?
I guess where, yeah,
Yeah.
just that left corner particularly.
Yeah, so what we want to think about is, I'll do a side view. The light is coming down like so. On a bumpy surface. You got to think about where the light is going to fall off on each one of those and what it's going to hit. So this would cast a shadow down onto this one. But the top of it is still going to be lit. This one, barely any light, just on the edge there where it's not getting cast shadow or form shadow. This one would drop completely into the darkness because this shadow would go down and block it.
Right.
So what happens when you're working on a three-dimensional one like this is you're going to have some that are maybe peeking out, like this is just all 2D. But in 3D, like this one, there's no bumps above it to block that light coming down. So imagine the same scenario, but this one has no bumps above it. The light can come down and hit all of this. So you get every now and then some random bumps sticking out down below that are going to catch just a little bit of the light. They're sticking out just far enough to catch some of that light and create a light spot in the dark. Again, it's sort of like a yin and yang. We want to have those sometimes in addition to the other way. So this would be light in the dark, and then dark in the light. We're doing the same thing up here. We have these little dark spots up here sticking out on this big white field of no value. And it's just because up here, there's a tiny bit of cast shadow and a tiny bit of ambient occlusion. The rest of it is all in the light. So we're just trying to balance. Some of it's design, some of it's consideration. But once you learn that rule of like, okay, we need to have a little bit of light in the dark and a little bit of dark in the light, how can I make that happen? It's just a choice after that.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. So yeah, maybe this one is a little bit darker because it's got all these bumps above it. But these ones, there's no clear bump right above it that would be blocking that light, so I'm giving them a little bit more of that light living down there. Cool. And this kind of takes them back and forth sometimes. You got to keep working in and out, in and out. You're also welcome to go back in with a white pen.
I actually bought one this past weekend
Nice.
because one of my pens actually was running out of ink, and I'm like, I need to actually get some good ones.
Yeah, so if I wanted
So I
to,
grabbed a white gel pen too.
nice. Yeah, I love those. Maybe I could work in a little bit more light onto some of these. It's getting a little bit too dark, but just be careful. You can really get lost in the sauce.
Yeah.
Um, like that, maybe. Not too bad. Okay, cool. There's my swatch. Now we can take it and we're going to wrap it. So now we have to take this and think about compression in addition. As these bumps move down, what's going to happen? When you look at a sphere or a dome from front on, it's just this. As it moves, let's say we're rotating it up, it starts to look more like that. Eventually, it'll look like this. So we're taking this roundness and sort of shrinking it, flattening it. And then down here, it's completely flat and way more round up on top. So it's sticking up more. So we have to do that. And we also want to build out our contour. That's like step one, should be building in the contour. So on this, I'm going to, again, think about my big, medium, small considerations. Maybe I'm making that too big there. A little bit smaller for the rest of these. In addition to big, medium, small bumps, you can also think about the lengths. So I don't want to just go around the whole thing like this. That's not very helpful. It still feels kind of nice because we have, big, medium, small, big, medium, small, 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 medium, small. It's like a good variety. But we also have gaps. And you can't tell as much on this image right where I'm looking. But in some of these other areas, like over here, we have a variety of widths. Here's a medium, here's a long, here's a small, here's a long again, another small, a medium, medium, long. So we're able to design that. We can pull that in. It's like when you're listening to music, you don't want all noise all the time. Imagine the drummer was just riding the crash cymbal the entire time. That's too much noise. It's too obnoxious. You also don't want no excitement at all. John Cage 4 minutes and 32 seconds or whatever. Like that's it has a place, I guess, but you don't want nothing. So you have to be very specific with when. You have to keep it interesting. Syncopation. It's like adding syncopation to our rhythm. So instead of just having noise all the way across, I'm going to do a little gap. And then let's do like a medium gap. More noise. And then we'll do a long gap all the way around the front. Start again. Let's do a short gap. And then a medium gap. Then another short gap. Then a long gap. I made this a little bit too big, so I'm going to turn it into a few different ones. And I'm not going to worry too much about stuff outside my focal point there. Maybe you could throw in a couple little tiny guys, like we're just seeing the edge of it, but not enough to kind of break up our rest. I'm trying to avoid symmetry. Our pattern that we're building this on is kind of just little balls. That's just like circles, bubbly shapes that we're putting around. You can sort of randomly place these bubbles in a way that is aesthetic and doesn't feel man-made or manufactured or organized. You can build everything else into it after the fact. So that's kind of our pattern that the shape or the form is going to live on top of. So now that we got the outside in, let's go right in at our core shadow, which we said was a little bit lower on this one, and do exactly what we did here. This is basically the plane that is facing us, so we gotta squash it just a little bit. Building in these blocks, keeping the top a little bit more open. Occasional singular one. Keep in mind to kind of flatten that bump a little bit like this middle one. We're going underneath the form a little bit here. I'm trying to be sparing with where I put it. Same way I was doing it on the contour. We don't want just like noise everywhere all over the place. You got to kind of push and pull where you put that information. Okay, I'm just trailing off as I get outside my focal point. And then let's go up to the top. Way less information. We're just kind of hitting the bottom of some of these, especially up here, like near where the highlight was. Very bright image right there. So just keep it very minimal. All right. How's it going for everybody? Any big issues that need solving?
Not so far.
Okay,
Not yet.
cool. The cast shadow has to represent the contour. It's basically whatever the core shadow sees, right? So if my core shadow is down here, we can kind of go along, and wherever that core shadow is like intersecting a bump, we can bring that down and put it onto our cast shadow. So it's intersecting a bump there, intersecting some bumps there. Right there's another one. Another one right there. This sticks out pretty far, so I think it would also catch that one. And then it goes around the corner here, so we get a couple little bumps. Let's put in our darkest darks, ambient occlusion. It's going to help with everything else. So we can start with just our cast shadow here. Careful not to go right over your texture of your contour. Work around that. Pulling lines out from underneath. Another really easy trick to show that texture is in the cast shadow. You're describing the form another way through the silhouette cast on the ground. Okay, and then let's get some of these ambient occlusions that are going to be very, very strong right at the cast shadow. So all these pinches, I already used pretty heavy line weight with this Sharpie, but if you're just using a fine liner, go back in and kind of straddling this terminator, push those shadows pretty dark. Maybe add a little bit of a cast shadow underneath each one. Close off some of them, maybe. Okay, let's start filling in some of our value. So I'm going to do a hatch that follows the form on the surface of this plant stem, probably some breed of cactus. So a nice tight hatching right around that. Coming down below it. Just like we did on the swatch, but now all the lines have to wrap. You always kind of have to distort your pattern to fit around the form. So we're using hatching line to denote this value that is not really textured. It's just the smooth part of the stem. And that will kind of naturally blend everything together. And also then go on and hatch on the individual bumps to tie it together. So we've already created some good contrast, but we have a little bit too much light in the bottom half. So we need to drop those as well. So just carry your hatching through. And on these ones that are at the bottom, it's going to get real messy for me, but try to push those down with the hatch mark so that they live in the shadow area. And for me, this is so small with my big pen here. I don't know if I can actually get in that like tiny little seam or the eye shape in there, maybe on a few of them up top. Maybe that is the value zone where it can be read easily, is up on the top side. But in the shadow zone, it's really hard to see that. So for me in the shadows, I'm just going to take each one of these bumps and imagine that shadow living on it. But it's so small, you know, like some of them you may just need to turn into a dark side on the bottom. The farther up we go, the lower that core shadow gets, we're going to see more light. So that's why up here it might be easier to see some of that splitting and the lighter value. But our goal is to create these sandwiches. Okay, so right around, just above that core shadow on the core shadow, that's where you want the most contrast to be happening. So you can see in here I have like this little bump right here. It's dark, completely black on the underside, very light on the top, and then we have just gray kind of surrounding it. That's ideal. That's kind of what we're looking for. There are technically highlights on every little bump. When we're working on white paper like this, that's very hard to see. So you could maybe use hatching to tone everything else down just a little bit, except for the highlight. That's a lot of work. You could just leave it. I've kind of drawn this line here to say, hey, there's a highlight up here. If you tone your paper, then you could go in and put in a little tiny white dot on this like upper band, wherever there's a plane facing towards the light, which is going to happen a lot on these bumps coming off of that plane. You're going to put in a little white highlight, and then you could fill in this area as well. Maybe I can tone my paper real quick with something to show you what that would look like.